John Allison is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of BB&T Corporation. This is a $118 billion financial holding company. I think on the posters we have 105, so you've gone up 13 since we published those posters. We mostly think of BB&T as a bank. We go around here and we see the ATMs or we see the branches. But we were talking at dinner about how banks are really financial holding companies today with so many different lines of business: insurance, real estate, wealth management, many, many different kinds of services that they offer. And BB&T is certainly no exception. BB&T is, in fact, the 9th largest financial holding company in the United States, and they employ about 30,000 people. John Allison has a BS in Business Administration from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and an MBA from Duke University. He has several honorary doctorates and awards and serves on boards. He's very familiar with universities. He talks on about 10 college campuses every year, and he serves on boards at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Duke University, Wake Forest University, and the Medical School Board, which is kind of an interesting departure. So he's very familiar with college campuses. But most notably for us, we have John Allison here tonight because he's someone who's known as an ethical leader. He's well known for infusing his values throughout the organization he runs and leading with integrity and with principle. You were handed, I believe, a copy of his philosophy. We were to be distributing, I know we have those, philosophy statements from BB&T. And the statement of philosophy that BB&T has is a great example of how Mr. Allison uses his leadership position to create a culture of morality and honesty at BB&T. John Allison loves to speak to students, and we're delighted to have him here tonight. Please help me to welcome John Allison.
Good evening. It's really a pleasure to be with you tonight. I always enjoy the opportunity to talk to bright young people who are going to be future leaders in our society and are going to make a big difference in our society. Our purpose tonight is to talk about leadership and values. To some degree, we have a crisis of values in our society today. We've had some very serious ethical deviations in business with the WorldComs and the Enrons. We seem to have endless ethical deviations in politics. I think many people realize that values are important, but many people do not use values very effectively. Many people have what I call a hodgepodge of values. They do one thing and they feel guilty because they didn't do something else because they hold contradictory beliefs. And very few people have really taken the time to think about what is the purpose of values. The purpose of values is to provide us with principles that if we live these principles, we improve the probability of staying alive, being successful, and ultimately being happy. So values are really about principles that lead to success and happiness. Even having the right principles doesn't guarantee we'll be successful because things happen in Mother Nature beyond our control, but they improve the odds. And if you think of values in that context, and values aren't arbitrary, they aren't capricious, they don't fall out of the sky. In fact, we have to figure out what are the right values for us. And we really have a scientific problem. And here's the question. Given the laws of nature, given Mother Nature, and given human nature, what principles are most likely to lead to our success and ultimately to our happiness? We have 10 core values at BB&T, and as you think about these values, you'll find they're not only non-contradictory, they're integrated. Fail on one and fail on all the values. Our first value is reality. What is. A baby's born at the hospital in Hampton Roads this morning, and that baby opens her eyes. And guess what? Mom's here, Dad's here, the doctor's here, the nurses are here, the hospital's here, we're here. That baby, in fact, doesn't get to make it up. That baby's task in life is to figure out how to live, be successful, and ultimately be happy given the facts of reality. At some time, you were that baby. You were born into this world, and you've been trying to figure out how to live and be successful and be happy given the facts of reality. At one level, the obviousness of reality is very clear. But a lot of people are in resistance to reality. They don't want it to be, and that causes them to make bad decisions. In fact, people make three basic errors in relation to reality. These are actually epistemological errors. They're errors in thinking, but they relate to reality. The first error, we use a metaphor, wishing something is so does not make it so. It's a metaphor for the ultimate psychological sin. And that sin is the act of evasion. Evasion occurs when you're presented with some piece of information that at some level, often subconscious, you know ought to be examined. But you refuse to examine it. You classically don't hear it. And the reason you don't hear it is because it threatens something you want to believe about yourself or you want to believe about the world, so you literally don't hear it. You evade. And when you evade, you are detached from reality, which is a bad place to be. I grew up as a small business lender, and I observed many times the way small businesses get in trouble is the leader of that business, maybe the business is going along fine, something happens in the environment that says they needed to do something different than they're doing, but they don't want to face that fact, and they just drive that business right into the ground. They evade that fact. Unfortunately, everybody evades. You evade. Now, your mom, dads, your spouses, your friends have been telling you about your evasions. We all evade, and when you evade, you are detached from reality. Give you an interesting thing to think about. The next time you hear something that you've heard before that threatens something you want to believe about yourself or the world, but you've refused to examine it, at least bring it to consciousness and look at it objectively. The second error that people make in regards to reality is a belief in popularity. Reality is independent of popularity. Year 1600, 99.9% of the people on the planet were absolutely certain that the sun went around the earth. They got up in the morning, the sun comes up in the east, goes down in the west. People were certain the sun went around the earth. 1620, Galileo proved that the earth went around the sun. The fact that 99.9% of the people believed the sun went around the earth had no effect on the sun or the earth. Reality is independent of popularity. At some conscious level, many people recognize that, but a lot of times people don't behave that way. Have you ever been in a situation where you say, well, the reason I'm going to do this is because everybody else is going to do it right, even though I know it's wrong. Everybody else is cheating, why don't I? Have you ever been in a group setting where you made a decision knowing consciously that you would do exactly the opposite thing? Maybe there wasn't an ethical decision, but you were swayed by the thinking of the group. Reality is independent of popularity. The third error that people make in regard to reality, and this is the error that's caused the most unnecessary human suffering, is the belief in authority. Reality is independent of authority. 1620, Galileo publishes his book, proves that the earth goes around the sun. The Pope reads Galileo's book, and the Pope is the intellectual, spiritual leader of Western civilization. He's a highly educated, highly intelligent person, but he does not like Galileo's book. It threatens his most fundamental beliefs. So he promptly puts Galileo under house arrest for the rest of his life. He tries to destroy all the copies of Galileo's books. A few sneak out, lead to Newton, lead to the Industrial Revolution, the quality of life we have today. Guess what? Whether the Pope liked it or not, the earth kept going around the sun. Reality is independent of authority. Interestingly enough, we do have to rely on authorities. We have to go to doctors. We have to rely on authorities. But we are responsible for evaluating our authorities. And we can't take what our authorities say based on faith. We have to take it on our judgment of their facts. One of the most interesting observations about reality is called the law of cause and effect, or the law of causality. If you want to visualize the law of cause and effect, you can see one billiard ball hitting another billiard ball, and you see the first billiard ball cause the second billiard ball to move. But the law of causality is, in fact, much deeper than that. What the law of causality says is that everything in nature has a nature, and everything must act consistent with this nature. Everything in nature has a nature, and everything must act consistent with this nature. Billiard balls have to act like billiard balls. Elephants have to act like elephants. And as a human being, we have a nature, and we must act consistent with our nature. However, we are not billiard balls. We are not deterministic. In fact, one of the most unique and powerful aspects of our nature is we have free will. We have to make many choices, and those choices are ours to make. We are constantly making choices. And the self-evidency of that is the most fundamental set of choices that you make, that only you can make, that you've been making since you were very young, and you make every few seconds. And that choice is to focus your mind or not, to be here or not. During this presentation, some of you will be here, some of you won't. Nobody can stay in focus all the time, but you do choose when you stay in focus. And in a presentation like this, you should be in focus. And maybe on Friday night, you should go out of focus. But when you're out of focus, you are detached from reality. It's an interesting observation. There are some business people that have very high IQs. Interestingly enough, I think that is the exception rather than the rule. What I find about business people, successful business people, that really distinguishes them is they tend to evade less and stay in focus more. And that is a huge competitive advantage in life. The other unique aspect of our nature as human beings is we have the capacity to think rationally, to think objectively. Everything that's alive has a method for staying alive. A lion has claws to hunt with. Deer has speed to avoid the hunter. We have the capacity to think. And our capacity to think is literally our only means of survival, success, and happiness. There are no shortcuts or no free lunches. Interestingly enough, we're very fortunate that the great genius of history, in my opinion, Aristotle, taught us how to think. He did that in 300 BC, and what he said is that we ought to begin with sound premises based on the facts. We ought to use the induction and deduction to derive conclusions. We ought to integrate those conclusions without contradiction. The fundamental rule of logic is avoid contradiction. Then that conclusion could become a premise for a higher level of thinking. So we've known the proper method of thinking since 300 BC, but unfortunately a lot of times people don't think this way. A lot of times people think in very sloppy manners, and you get sloppy conclusions when you do that. Interesting thing is that also when people try to improve the thinking process, a lot of times we look at the higher levels of thinking. And that can be a very useful exercise. We go back to MBA school. We go to advanced education programs, and that can be a very useful exercise. As interesting as that is, however, the real lever in thinking is premises. Your premises, to some degree, derive your conclusions. That's why sometimes you find on college campuses some really bright people that have some very bizarre conclusions because they got some problem with their premise. If you think about a premise, it's like a foundation of a building. If you got something wrong with the foundation, you're going to have something wrong with the rest of the building. And it's interesting to think about where you got your most important premises, your most fundamental beliefs. Beliefs that have a profound impact on how successful and, more important, how happy you are. Where'd you get your most important, your fundamental beliefs? You primarily got them from your moms, dads, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when you were very young. And where'd they get their beliefs? From their moms, dads, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when they were very young. Where'd they get their beliefs? From their moms, dads, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when they were very young. A couple thoughts about your fundamental beliefs. First, the odds are that those beliefs are very primitive. They've been through a long process passed down from one generation to the next. Secondly, the odds are very high that you have some contradictory beliefs. You can probably see that in your parents. You may love your parents, but you probably see things that keep them from being as successful and keep them from being as happy as they could be. Well, you may have a different content, but the odds are you have the same context. If you want to improve your thinking process, by far the most powerful thing you can do is objectively look at your fundamental beliefs as an adult and reject all beliefs which are inconsistent with reality. They can't be. And reject all contradictions because contradictions can't exist in reality. Induction and deduction. Deduction is where we go from the general to the specific. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is moral. Deduction is a concrete application of a general principle. It's a very powerful thinking tool. Again, Aristotle taught us how to do that. And I find at universities, most people are pretty good at deduction. They can pretty much go from a general principle to a specific conclusion. It is still a very powerful thinking tool. However, far more important is induction. Induction is where we go from the many concrete things in the real world to a general principle. How did you decide that all men were mortal? The most basic expression of induction is called concept formation. Concept formation is something that practically all human beings can do. Some can do it better than others. When you were 2 years old, you were able to look at chairs and see that they were like each other and different than other things. You developed a word, a concept called chair. And you were able to look at tables and see they were like each other and different other things. You developed a word concept called table. And your parents got very happy and excited. And if you have children, you get very happy and excited when they do that because you know that's the beginning of the thinking process. They can associate those concrete things with a general concept. And then you made a big intellectual leap. You're able to look at chairs and tables that don't look like each other at all. And you developed a word, a concept called furniture based on a common purpose. And you did that all the way up to your view of what's right how the world should be run, love, truth, justice, your most advanced ideas happened in that method. A couple thoughts about concept formation. First, it is what makes the human mind so powerful. Take something as simple as chairs. In the real world, there are billions of chairs. If you had to deal with them perceptually like an animal does, that's all you could think about. Of course, they wouldn't be there if you had to deal with them that way. But in one word, you've captured literally billions of things. And if you want to be a very effective thinker, you've got to have good concepts. You want to capture as many things as you can in one idea. Secondly, thing about concept formation is it open-ended. And this is kind of an important idea from a lifelong perspective. Take something as simple as chairs. As an adult, you know a lot more about chairs than you did when you were 2 years old. However, if you did it right, what you knew at 2 years old isn't wrong. And you should keep every concept open. You should be able to learn about every concept, but that doesn't mean that you don't know certain things, but you can continue to learn. So concepts are open-ended. The third thought about concepts is they are hierarchical. You start out with tables and chairs, and then you went up to truth, justice, what's the right way for the world to be run. The ideas have a big impact on your life. Unfortunately, however, while most of you did a great job with tables and chairs, most of us cheat on higher level concepts. Because the way we get our highest level concepts, we classically get them from who? Authorities. Your most advanced concepts should be traceable back to reality, or they aren't valid, they aren't right. I talk about concept formation with a business group. In business, we talk about something called learning from experience. And learning from experience is very important. The older I get, the more important it is, I see. And learning from experience is something that a lot of people don't do very effectively. We've had a management development program at BB&T going back over 35 years. We've hired thousands of people into that program. Fortunately, most of them have been very successful. Some of them have been unsuccessful. If you look at the difference between the very successful and the unsuccessful, it's not IQ and it's not educational background. The highly successful people were far better at learning from their experiences. And what they really did was develop concepts that made them better decision makers. They became master in their field of endeavor. They might become a master lender in our business by learning through those experiences. And the way they did that is a very important concept itself. They had an active mind. And if you think about a person that has an active mind, they're a very effective learner. They see life as a lifelong learning experience. They tend to read more, they tend to go to more educational seminars, but they particularly learn effectively from their experiences. And the reason they're able to do that is a couple simple ideas. First, a lot of the most powerful learning in life takes place through mistakes, right? You probably learned a lot from some of the mistakes you have made, right? Interestingly enough, however, a lot of times we don't learn from our mistakes. Have you ever done something you said, ooh, I did that before, ooh, I did that before? And it's because you didn't really admit the cause of that mistake. People that really have an active mind learn more effectively from their mistakes because why? They evade less. The second thing somebody with an active mind recognizes is that life is a constant education if you choose for it to be. We just had a dinner with a group of students, which was an excellent educational experience for me. And people that are active thinkers, people that have active minds, recognize that by staying in focus, they are continually in the learning process. We don't expect our employees to have high IQs, but what we do expect them to have is to be active minds, and in that context, make logical decisions based on the facts. Our third value is independent thinking. Independent thinking means thinking for yourself from the facts of reality. It makes two things both possible and necessary: responsibility and creativity. The most important meta-psychological decision you can make is to choose to be responsible for yourself. If you are not responsible for you, then you by definition become a victim of somebody else. And if you're a victim, you can't fix anything because you have to change somebody else, and you can't change anybody else. It is certainly true that bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, but you are responsible for doing the best you can with what happens to you. Interesting thing to think about, something that's very obvious that nobody wants to admit, and that is at least at the level of consciousness, we are all alone. Sorry, that's just the way it is. For that reason, only you can be responsible for you. Nobody else can possibly be responsible for you. The flip of that's also true. Classic parental error, classic managerial error. You cannot be responsible for your children. You are responsible to teach your children to be responsible for themselves, but you cannot be responsible for your children. Managers make this mistake all the time. You cannot be responsible for your employees. You are absolutely responsible to do your best to teach your employees to be responsible for themselves, but you can't be responsible for your employees. Responsibility, by the way, exists on two kind of meta planes. You have to be responsible for your success, which I would argue everybody in this room is, and I'll come back to that or you wouldn't be in this room tonight. But I find a lot of successful people don't take responsibility for their own happiness, and only you can make you happy. Creativity. All human progress is based on creativity, because unless somebody does something better, which by definition will be different, there cannot be any progress. Creativity is only possible to an independent thinker, somebody that thinks like the crowd, cannot be creative, cannot contribute to human progress. By the way, that's why entrepreneurs are so important. That's why free markets work. Free markets create an environment where people can be creative, innovative, and contribute to human progress. Our fourth value is productivity. Productivity exists on two planes. In a free market, profit is a good thing. Simply the difference between the value of what we create and the cost of creating it. The bigger the difference, the better. To be highly profitable, an organization must be very efficient. It must be very productive. At the individual level, productivity is that gut-level commitment to get the job done. Interesting observation about the psychological difference between high performers and non-performers. I get the opportunity, and I've been doing this for years, to go around and visit a lot of our branches, visit a lot of our home office functions. In fact, I was doing that this morning. And in that process, I go into situations sometimes where things aren't going very well. I'll use a branch as an example. And I'll go into the branch and I'll get a story about why the performance of that branch hadn't been so good. The story usually is, those competitors across the street, they're charging too lower rates on loans, they're paying too high rates on deposits. That stoplight is keeping people from coming into my branch. And gee, if those home office people would ever fix a computer, everything would be okay. Sometimes there's some truth in that. Sometimes there are absolutely factors beyond people's control. There's nothing they can do about it. Sometimes we change branch managers and everything gets okay. I look at the flip of that. We have what we call our sterling performers, our highest producing employees, and we have a really special event to them. And it's very interesting to talk to that group of people. First, almost nobody wins it every year, but the same 25% tend to come back. Maybe it's every third year they tend to come back. So it tends to be the same group of people. And if you look at those high performers, they face the same obstacles, but what they'll tell you about what they did and how much more they're going to do. And they have a very different psychological focus than non-performers. They focus on the end. They don't focus on the reasons to fail. They focus on the opportunity to succeed. Non-performers tend to look for reasons to fail. High performers look for reasons to succeed. Our fifth value is honesty. Honesty is a foundational value. Without it, nothing else follows. Most of the ethical issues we've seen in our society were really around failures in the honesty spectrum. So honesty is a foundational value. Unfortunately, the problems we see in business and politics reflect a much more deep issue that's in the liberal arts departments of most of our major universities. And it's a very fundamental, long-term attack on honesty. It's a very sophisticated attack. And basically the essence of the attack is that there is no truth. Everything is subjective, right? Everything is kind of skeptical. We kind of make it up in a social context. And if there was any truth, we couldn't know it anyway, right? Well, if honesty is a comparison to truth. If there is no truth, there can't be any honesty. While it is a very sophisticated argument, a very prevalent argument, it is absurd on its face. When you were 2 years old, you put your hand on a hot stove and you got burned. Ooh, there's something hot out there. You ran around the house and you hit the door sill. Bang, there's something hard out there. You may not have known what it was, but you knew there was a reality out there. And there is a reality out there. And honesty is a comparison to that reality. Interestingly enough, that same group flips that argument and says, well, if you claim there is truth out there, then the standard for honesty is you always have to be right. That's not so. You can be honest and be wrong. The standard for honesty, however, is very demanding. What it says is we must mean what we say and know what we mean. We must mean what we say and know what we mean. Mean what we say has kind of two planes. One, you don't go out and intentionally mislead people. And I doubt many people in this room do that on what I call a meta level. But there's a little deeper trick than that. A lot of times people tell what I would call white lies that they rationalize are for good purposes, and the cumulative effect of white lies can become a big lie. One of the things I observe a lot of times, managers don't want to tell people that they're not performing well. They just want to give them positive feedback until they end up firing that person. Cumulative effect of white lies is a big lie. So say what we means just that. Say what we mean. Know what we mean. The standard is not omniscient. As human beings, we're not omniscient. But it says if I'm talking about something important, I'm not going to claim a level of knowledge that I don't have. I'm going to know what I'm talking about. And the most fundamental reflection of honesty is we keep our agreements. We must keep our agreements. Our sixth value is integrity. There are a lot of apparent temptations in life. In my business dealing with money, we see lots of apparent temptations. But what you can know with certainty, if you've developed your principles logically based on the facts, those temptations aren't really temptations. They're just ways to fail. Adhering to your principles is to your long-term well-being. Unfortunately, a lot of times people do not act with integrity, and that occurs, I think, for two basic reasons. Either they don't have principles, or more likely they have a group of principles that don't make any sense. They got a lot of bromides and cliches. That's not a good way to live your life. So whether you agree with what I have to say or not, you should be absolutely clear about your principles, and you should never compromise your principles. There's a lot of compromise around the content of life, but never compromise the context. And recognize in that context, integrity is not a duty. It's not hard work. It's about living with principles that lead to success and happiness. So it's a means of being successful and being happy. Our seventh value is justice or fairness. In human relationships, justice is the number one value. If you ask somebody what they think about their manager, pretty soon they're going to say, well, I think my manager's fair or not. And interestingly enough, people don't want to be under-rewarded, as you would expect, based on their performance. People don't want to be over-rewarded based on their performance, and they're right to feel that way. In addition, if there's no reward for superior performance, the best people will leave and we'll be worse off. But equally important, if there's no reward for superior performance, the average person won't be motivated to do better. And a lot of leadership and management and organization is getting average people to perform at above average levels. At BB&T, we strongly believe that those that contribute the most ought to receive the most. We have incentive systems that go all the way down to the teller line. They're not perfect. Measuring performance is a difficult thing, but the goal's clear. We want to be sure that those that contribute the most receive the most. We also, as an organization, consciously reject egalitarianism. In fact, I think egalitarianism is one of the most destructive ideas in our society. What egalitarians want is not equal opportunity. They want equal outcome. It is true that every human being should be equal before law, and it's true that every human being ought to be treated with dignity and respect as a human being. But it is not true that everybody's equal. In fact, I've never met two equal people. Every person in this room is different. Every person in this room is unique. Every person in this room is special. We are all unique, special human beings. We're all unique, special individuals. At the extreme, Thomas Edison and the Boston Strangler are not equal. Because people are not equal, we do have to judge people. And for most of us, judging, evaluating other people is the most important set of judgments we make. And very important to the success and happiness of our life. Do we marry the right person? Are we getting ready to marry the right person? Very important set of questions. Because people are not equal, we do have to judge them. Judging people is very important, so how we do it is very important. And there's a proper process for judging, evaluating other people. We have to judge them as individuals based on their merits, based on what matters. So we do have to evaluate. We do have to judge other people, but as individuals, based on their merits, based on what matters. For that reason, we consciously reject collectivism in all its ugly variations. Collectivists include racists, sexists, communists, socialists, nationalists. Well, the interesting thing about collectivists is they are always wrong because everybody that's a member of the group is different. If you look in business, the most common forms of collectivism you see are racism and sexism. I think we made some progress on racism and sexism, and we got a long way to go. It's interesting to think about what motivates a racist or a sexist. Probably a lot of different factors. I think the most common factor is low self-esteem. I'm not any good, but I'm better than you because you're your membership in some group. An interesting thing I also think is most racists, most sexists don't realize that being a racist or a sexist is bad for them. For example, we have a financial center manager, and that manager doesn't hire the best person to do the job because that person's black, white, male, female, Chinese, any other non-essential reason. What's going to happen? The financial center is going to be less successful than it would have been. If that financial center manager continues to follow that pattern, eventually she'll be fired because that financial center will be unsuccessful, and that is a kind of justice. So being a racist or sexist is bad for the person being discriminated against, but it's also bad for the person doing the discrimination. And why is that? It's because of a very general principle. As a human being, our means of survival, success, and happiness is our capacity to think rationally, to make objective, logical decisions. The arena in which the most important thinking should take place is in our evaluation of other human beings. When we judge people for the wrong reasons, we have bad consequences for ourselves. A couple other thoughts about justice. Justice is a two-edged sword. It's usually pretty easy to reward superior performance. I find a lot of people quite willing to do that. Sometimes it's very difficult to deal with non-performance. Failing to deal with non-performance is an injustice. Non-performers obviously hurt the members of the team, but failing to deal with non-performance is not fair to the non-performers. I have never met a happy non-performer. So justice requires that we deal with non-performance. One other thought about justice. Justice only applies to human action. Mother Nature is neither just nor unjust. A lot of people spend a lot of time cursing Mother Nature. That is a waste of time. Justice only applies to human action. Eighth thing is pride. Aristotle said that pride was the greatest of all virtues. Because to have it, you had to have all the others. You had to be just, honest, have integrity, be a rational, independent thinker. As such, pride serves two very important roles. It's a psychological reminder to do good and a psychological reward for having done good. I want to ask you to think about an interesting test that you should apply fairly often. More than we like to think about, we're faced with what I'll call moral decisions. Not operating decisions, but moral decisions. The next time you're faced with a moral decision, ask yourself this question. Would you be willing to tell the people you care about, the people you've judged important in your life, not the newspapers, but the people you've judged important in your life, what you're going to do, and more importantly, why you're going to do it? And if you wouldn't tell the people that you care about what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, don't do it. Because you will always know what you did, and you will always know why you did it. And you won't be able to be proud of you. Our ninth value is self-esteem and self-motivation. At higher levels in organizations and for groups like in this room, this, in my opinion, is the number one value. When I find that people fail at higher levels in organizations, it's almost never because they aren't smart enough, and it's almost never because they don't have the educational background. It usually relates to some self-esteem issue that is usually some subconscious self-esteem issue that causes them to do some self-destructive behavior. By definition, you have to have a high level of self-esteem to be happy. So self-esteem is really important, and most people have it backwards. 4 thoughts about self-esteem. First, self-esteem is an expression of self-confidence in your ability to live and be successful given the facts of reality. Therefore, self-esteem is earned. It is earned by how you live your life. Live your life well, raise your self-esteem. Live your life poorly, lower your self-esteem. You cannot give anybody else self-esteem. That's why promoting children that haven't mastered a grade lowers their self-esteem. Self-esteem is earned by how you live your life. Second thought about self-esteem, and this is by far the most important idea and certainly the most controversial idea, but I want you to really think about this idea. In order to have a high level of self-esteem, you must at a very deep level believe that you are capable of being good and that you have the moral right to be happy. In order to have a high level of self-esteem, you must at a deep level believe you're capable of being good and you have the moral right to be happy. Unfortunately, very commonly held belief in our society that I suspect everybody in this room has some of is a belief that as human beings we're born bad. And the reason we're born bad is we're selfish. And selfish is bad, right? Johnny in the sandbox, 4 years old, having a good time, playing with the truck, not bothering anybody else, just having a great time. Along comes Fred. Fred wants Johnny's truck. Johnny won't give him his truck. Mom, Dad, kindergarten teacher, Sunday school teacher interferes in the process and says, hey, Johnny, give Fred that truck. Don't be selfish. Don't be bad. Interesting question. Where did Fred get the right to Johnny's truck? Well, why we got a social welfare system. Interesting question. If that happened to you several thousand times between the age of 2 and 6, you tend to have a belief that being selfish is bad. Interesting belief. Immutable, non-negotiable, fact of reality. Everything that is alive must act in its self-interest or die. Immutable, non-negotiable, fact of reality. Everything that is alive must act in its self-interest or die. A lion has to hunt or starve. A deer has to run from the hunters or be eaten. Trees shade out other trees to get light. Amoeba take chemicals that other amoeba would like to have. Life, by definition, is self-sustaining action. Anything that's alive that quits sustaining itself dies. That is the nature of life. Life requires self-sustaining action. To say that human beings are bad because they're selfish is the same thing as saying the sun's bad because it's hot, gravity's bad because it holds us down. Sun should be hot, gravity should hold us down. As a living entity, we should act in our self-interest. The only option is death. That's the way Mother Nature designed the system. Now, it's very important that we define acting in our self-interest, acting selfishly properly. And I will define it as acting in our rational, long-term self-interest. And the reason that's important is we get two false alternatives. And the classic false alternatives are to take advantage of other people or to self-sacrifice. Neither one of which, by the way, is selfish. A lot of times, in fact, when people talk about selfish, people say, well, taking advantage of other people is selfish. Taking advantage of other people is not selfish. It is self-defeating. It's self-defeating in two ways. One very practical, the other psychological. You know, I might fool Susie, I might fool Tom, but pretty soon Susie and Tom are going to tell Harry and tell Jane, and nobody's going to trust me. And you probably know some people like that have tried to manipulate other people and nobody trusts them. In business, that's a killer. So if people don't trust you, you're out of business. So taking advantage of other people doesn't work practically. It also doesn't work at a very deep level, too. If you're trying to take advantage of other people, we have to be focused on other people's psychology. And other people's psychology is a big mess. And you're going to end up being paranoid if you focus and try to manipulate other people, because you're going to become detached from reality. Simple observation. In my job, I get to meet a lot of, quote, successful people. Interestingly enough, I have never, ever met somebody that was both successful and happy that got there taking advantage of other people. Now, I've met some people that were successful, had a lot of money, that I think got there taking advantage of other people. And they're the most miserable people I've ever met. You can't be successful and happy taking advantage of other people because you're focused on other people's psychology and you're going to end up being paranoid. It is true that other human beings exist in reality. You have to pay attention to other human minds, but you need to be anchored in the facts. Manipulating other people is not selfish, it's self-defeating. How about self-sacrifice? That's classically what you're told to do. That's a great thing you're supposed to do, is self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice carried to its logical extremes called altruism. Altruism is a philosophically self-defeating concept. Altruism brings down to the lowest common denominator. And what that implies is if I have more money than Jane does, I'm morally obligated to give it to Jane. But interesting question for Jane. Even though Jane is poor, if there's anybody that has less than Jane, she has two options. She can keep the money I gave to her and enjoy the money, but be bad, or she has to give that money away to Tom. And if anybody has anything less than Tom, he's got to give it to Susie. If anybody has anything less than Susie, she's got to give it to Fred, down to the lowest common denominator. Unfortunately, there are always people in the process of dying. And the only way to be equal to somebody that's dying is to die. The monks in the Middle Ages took that very seriously. They beat themselves with whips, they drank dirty dishwater, they slept on rocks. They were real altruists. We have a lot of people that claim to be altruists today, they don't get it. The monks got it. They got what altruism is about. That is not a pro-life concept. Taking advantage of other people and self-sacrifice, neither one are in your rational long-term self-interest. What we really are is traders. We trade value for value. We get better together. In our business, we help our clients achieve economic success and financial security. They let us make a profit doing it. In fact, life is about creating win-win relationships. It's about getting better together. There are only two stable relationship conditions, win-win and lose-lose. Anytime you get greedy and you try to create a win-lose relationship, eventually it will end up being lose-lose. You see that with spouses. They start off with a win-win. One gets greedy, ends up being a lose-lose. The flip of that's also interesting, true. Anytime you create a lose-win relationship, you'll get bitter and you will tank that relationship. So life is about creating win-win relationships. Any important relationship in your life, you should ask yourself, what's in it for me? That's a very valid question, or you will tank that relationship eventually. And you should also ask yourselves, what's in it for them? How does this relationship benefit them? We've done lots of mergers and acquisitions, and when we get ready to acquire a company, we certainly ask, well, how does it work for BB&T? Why is this a good thing for us? We also ask, how does it work for the company we're going to acquire? Because we know if it ultimately doesn't work for them, it will not work for us. It won't work for us. So life is about creating win-win relationships. And of course, it is in your rational self-interest to help your family, to help your friends, to help the people you care about, to help the people you work with because you care about it right. That is in your self-interest. It's not a sacrifice to help your children if you love your children, right? That's not a sacrifice. Interesting thing, by the way, most people don't think about this. Love is the ultimate expression of selfishness. Most people don't think about that. A lot of the age group of this group may be thinking about getting married. How would you think about this? Your spouse, you're getting ready to get married. Your spouse, your future spouse comes up to you and says, honey, I'm really excited about marrying you. This is the biggest self-sacrifice I've ever made. Not what you want to hear, right? Not what you want to hear. Love is an expression of selfishness. I happen to believe it is in my rational self-interest to support the United Way. The United Way is an umbrella charitable organization that makes the communities we live a lot better to be. The reason I believe it's my self-interest, I wouldn't want to live in the kind of place that would exist without a United Way, and I sure wouldn't want my children to live in that kind of place. So I believe it is in my rational self-interest to support the United Way. Because of that, I give more and give more consistently. I've found a lot of people involved with the United Way that kind of dance it around and get bitter because they're doing it out of sacrifice. If you believe it is in your rational self-interest, you will give more and give more consistently. And in that context, we should act in our rational long-term self-interest. We're not bad because we're selfish. We're alive because we're selfish. One of the great philosophical observations in the history of man was expressed by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Most people think about liberty, and liberty is very important, but liberty is an old idea. It goes back to the Greeks. The new idea that Jefferson expressed was the pursuit of happiness. Before Jefferson, before the thinkers of the Enlightenment, nobody existed for their own good. They existed for the good of the king, the good of the state, the good of the church. Nobody existed for their own good. What Jefferson said, the world-changing idea, was that each of us had the moral right to the pursuit of our personal happiness. We weren't guaranteed success in that pursuit, but we had that right. Interestingly enough, that created the most successful society in history and the most benevolent society in history. When people have a right to their own life, they're naturally nicer to other people. When people exist in socialist and communist societies, they all end up hating each other because they're all slaves to each other. And I agree with Jefferson. I agree that each of us has a moral right to the pursuit of our personal happiness. If you fundamentally, at a very deep level, don't believe you're capable of being good and you don't have a moral right to the pursuit of your own personal happiness, you cannot have a high level of self-esteem. A couple other thoughts about self-esteem. Just like you need to evaluate, judge other people, you need to constantly be evaluating, judging yourself to know whether you're moving in the right direction. I'll tell you a little story. One of my heroes is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan's not only a great basketball player, I thought he was a real inspiration for poor kids. I know this is going to surprise you, but Michael Jordan is a much better basketball player than me. That's a surprise. Should I feel bad about me because I'm not as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan? No, right? Just like as human beings, we're born with a nature. As a concrete, specific human being, we're born with a nature. And all we can do is the best we can do given our nature. And interestingly enough, all that requires is I do something productive. that I enjoy doing it, and I do it the best I can do it. If you're doing something productive that you enjoy doing, and you're doing it the best you can do it, you are perfect. Well, people say that perfect's impossible. If it's impossible, it ain't perfect, right? Perfect is simply the best possible. And you can be perfect and get better because it's contextual. You can keep learning. You can keep growing. If you're not doing something productive, you're not doing something you enjoy doing, do something different. If you're doing something productive, you enjoy doing it, and you're not doing it the best you can do it better. Do it better. You can make two basic errors in self-evaluation. One error is when you think you're better than you are. It's called arrogance. Arrogance is a horrible sin. I've learned in lending money, don't lend money to arrogant people. Arrogance usually reflects a low level of self-esteem. A lot of times arrogance is a false kind of self-esteem. If you think you're arrogant, watch it. Very serious problem. Interestingly enough, I doubt there are many arrogant people in this room. My observation is exactly the opposite of that. What I find about most successful people, and that's what we have in this room, most successful people do not feel as good about themselves as they should. And I would probably think that's true for about everybody in this room. And the reason that that is so is at some level, subconscious level, you know that to be successful, you had to be selfish, right? You wouldn't be here if you weren't selfish. And selfish is bad. And that's a shame. That's a shame. Final thought about self-esteem. In the real world, self-esteem primarily comes from productive work and romantic love. I am not an expert in romantic love. I do think it is a fundamental human need, a survival of the species need. We'll offer you one observation on romantic love. If you're looking for somebody to make you happy, you are guaranteed to fail because nobody else can make you happy. If you're looking for somebody to share your happiness with, you're almost certainly going to be successful because a lot of people are looking for somebody to share their happiness with. Productive work. Productive work is a fundamental human need. We survive by production. That's our uniqueness of our species. Raising children is very productive, very hard work. Interestingly enough, for most of the people in this room, most of your self-esteem will come from your work because you'll be spending most of your time at work. And how well you do your work will have a profound effect on your self-esteem. Something I say to all the employees of BB&T, it's real important to BB&T that you do your job well. It is far, far, far more important to you. You might fool me about how well you do your job. You might fool your boss about how well you do your job. You'll never fool you. And if you don't do your work studying at this university the best you can possibly do it, you will have an immediate negative consequence. You will lower your self-esteem. It's an unavoidable negative consequence. The interesting thing is the flip of that's also true. Do your work the best you can possibly do it, and you will raise your self-esteem. And that creates a potential for what I call the virtuous cycle. If you're clear about your purpose in life, if you use your thinking ability to accomplish that purpose, you will raise your self-esteem. And if you raise your self-esteem, that'll give you more self-confidence and a better ability to accomplish your purpose. And life can be a virtuous circle, a positive circle. One integrating thought about self-esteem in that story about Michael Jordan and why I think egalitarianism is so bad. I am not as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. I don't care how hard I tried, how hard you tried to help me. I cannot be as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. It is simply not possible. You cannot make the average great. You can make the average better. That may be a very noble, very productive thing to do, but you can't make the average great. On the other hand, you can make the great average. True egalitarians get that, and they're in the business of making the great average. It's very easy to make Michael Jordan as good a basketball player as me. You just cut his legs off, right? Maybe a hand. You say, well, we wouldn't do that. We've been pretty tough on great people throughout the history of Western civilization. Poisoned Socrates, burned Joan of Arc, imprisoned Galileo. We're more sophisticated now. We do it with balls and chains. 1% of the population pays 25% of the taxes, 5% pays 50%, 50% pays no taxes. A great way to run a democracy. We do it with lots of mind-numbing rules and regulations like antitrust laws. We just put a bunch of balls and chains on Bill Gates, and what did he do? He quit. Interesting. Interesting thing about that. Great people make a disproportionate contribution to human well-being. Everybody in this room, your children, your grandchildren, have a better life, a longer life expectancy thanks to Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison not only invented the light bulb, he invented phonographs, he invented the research laboratory itself, electrical generation. When you put balls and chains on great people, bad things happen to the rest of us. Interesting thing is egalitarians like to try to grab the moral high ground. and it's why who can argue with everybody being equal? I don't think they have the moral high ground. I think what motivates egalitarians is the most destructive of all human emotions. It's called envy, hatred of the good for being the good. Very destructive emotion, avoided at all costs. 10th value is teamwork and mutual supportiveness. We want people that have strong personal goals, that have personal things that they want to accomplish. They're ambitious with their life, and also think for themselves. But recognize in any kind of organizational context, we're in it together. Therefore, I have to be a good team player. And teamwork has 3 basic dimensions. First, you must do your job well. Primary way that people fail teams is they fail to do their job. You've probably been on some artificial teams in the university setting. We had 10 people on the team. One guy didn't do his job. Classic way people fail teams. They don't do their own job. Second way that you have to participate is you have to root for the other person to make it in a mutually supportive manner. A lot of times we root against our fellow teammates. Why do we do that? Because we are envious. Old saying in the South, lie down with dogs, get fleas. The flip of that is also true. Spend time with great people and get great. Instead of envying people that are outperforming you, learn from them and root for them to get better, and you can get better in the same process. So root for your fellow teammates, for you, because it'll make you a better person. Final aspect of teamwork is intellectual. A really good team player not only does their job well, they don't just root for the fellow teammates, they figure out how to make the fellow teammates more successful. They think about how their work impacts the rest of the team. Simple example, one of our branch managers. Our branch manager has to do her job well, but she has to think about how her work impacts the teller. How's it affecting the customer services representative? Is she filling in the expense voucher right so somebody in the accounts payable area doesn't have to correct her mistake? So really good team players think about how their work affects the rest of the team. Those are our 10 core values at BB&T. If you think about those values, not only are they non-contradictory, they're integrated. Fail on one, fail on the others. If you're dishonest, you're disconnected from reality. You can't be rational, you can't be just, etc. I would also argue they're comprehensive, and I'll leave this for you to think about here. I could think of lots of other positive attributes. Trustworthiness is a positive attribute, but trustworthiness is simply a reflection of honesty. Courage is a positive attribute. Courage is simply a reflection of integrity. If you have integrity, you will have courage. I think every positive attribute actually fits in this system. Why would that matter? Go back to the economy of concept formation and why I talked about it. If in 10 concepts you can grasp the fundamental principles to improve the probability of staying successful and being successful and being happy, that's a very powerful tool. 10 very powerful tools that lead to success and happiness. Whenever you talk about rationality, the first thing that comes back is, hey, what about emotions? There's supposed to be this conflict between reason and emotion. Not so. Reasons are important and emotions are important. And emotions are never going away. They're going to be with you forever, so emotions matter. However, a lot of people really misconstrue the role of emotions. In some way, emotions are like primitive values, although they develop throughout your life. And what they are is largely automated response systems that you've developed that can be very helpful. You encountered somebody you like, you encountered somebody that you thought was like that person, and you decided you were going to like that style person the next time you met somebody like that. You went to an event, you didn't like it, you went to an event like it, and you didn't like it, and you say, well, I'm going to try to avoid those kind of events. And most of you did a pretty good job of that, because most of the time your emotions actually take you in the right direction. They help you make better decisions. If you were in prison, I would worry about your emotions, right? People in prison, the emotions take them in the wrong direction. However, I've never met anybody whose emotions always worked. And if you think about that hodgepodge way we develop our emotions, largely as children, it's not surprising that we have some dysfunctional emotions. A couple of thoughts about emotions. Emotions are learned. You may have a propensity towards certain emotions, but you learn your emotions. If they weren't learned, we'd all have the same emotions, and everybody in this room has a different set of emotions. There's nothing magical about it. They are learned experiences. Because emotions are learned, you can change your emotions. Changing your emotions can be the most powerful thing you can do in your life. It's tough. It requires a lot of courage. It takes a lot of introspection. Several members of our executive management team have significantly changed their emotions and dramatically improved their performance. Most important thought about emotions, however, is in any conflict between reason and emotion, always pick reason. Because emotions are just reasons that you had when you were a child. And for this group, that's particularly important because most of the time, if you think about it, your reasons and your emotions are going to line up. So when they don't line up, it's a red flag. And this is the red flag says, check your reasons. Am I really thinking about this properly? Maybe my emotions are initially right. But if I check my reasons, well, so I really shouldn't do that, then do what your reason tells you to do. I know when I was in college, I had several experiences where there was a conflict between my reasons and my motive. My brain told me not to do something, and I did it anyway. Every once in a while it worked out. Sometimes it didn't work out very well. And I'll think some of those things I'm worried about to this day. I wish I hadn't done them. In any conflict between reason and emotions, pick reason. What we're really trying to do at BB&T is create a knowledge-based learning organization. We think fundamental competitive advantage in the minds of our employees. We also believe in what I call systematized learning based on Aristotle's concept, excellence in art, one by training and habituation. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. We have what I call an operational leadership system. Interesting observation. We've done lots of mergers and acquisitions. We've dealt with lots of change in our organization. And when we focus on people where they're unhappy and we're unhappy with the results, we have found that talking about the results is largely a useless exercise. That people are getting the outcomes you would expect based on what they're doing, right? So talking about results is not going to change results. Results largely come from behaviors. So if you want different results in your life, you have to change your behaviors. For example, anybody in here that's unhappy with your weight, you're overweight from your view, and give you some bad news. If you're going to change your weight, you've got to eat less, eat differently, exercise more. Anybody in here unhappy with your grades? Give you some bad news. You're going to have to study more, study differently, find a mentor, or you're going to keep getting the same grades, right? Interesting thing about behavior change. You can temporarily change your behavior because of outside influences, but you cannot sustain behavior change unless you fundamentally believe it is the right thing to do. You will ultimately act consistent with your beliefs. People lose weight, gain it back, lose weight, gain it back. In order to sustain behavior change, you must believe it's the right thing to do. So if you want anything different in your life, if you want a different outcome, you must define the behaviors that will produce that different outcome, which usually are pretty clear, by the way. And then you must instill in yourself, or if you're a leader of your team, in your team, the beliefs that will make you act consistent with that behavior, which are mostly beliefs that say this is the right thing to do, and here's why it's the right thing to do. So leadership is not really about focusing on results. You do measure results, but it's really about instilling the right beliefs, the right behaviors that produce superior results. At BB&T, what we're trying to do is create value based on values. We believe that if we as an organization live with the right principles, we have the opportunity to be successful as an organization. We don't see those principles as duties or burdens. We see them as practical guides to success for our organization, and more importantly, to happiness for our employees. I know we got a lot of people in this room that will be important future leaders of our society, and I thank you for listening. Thank you very much. I think we do it on multiple planes. I do speeches like this. I know some of our employees here probably heard this 25 times. Do these speeches over and over and over again. We have a booklet that defines our values. We build our values into any of our educational programs. We build it into our performance appraisals. We give people feedback twice a year. We list these 10 values and evaluate them against these 10 values. I've never found a performance problem that wasn't found in one of these values. Never found any performance problem that wasn't in one of these values. But the most important thing is to live them. What I find in many organizations, and if you're thinking about the company you're going to, you might have a value statement that sounds good. But reflect on whether that value statement is livable in a globally competitive environment. Or is it really a bunch of bromides and cliches that sound good? Because what happens in many organizations, they have value statements, but nobody lives it. And the reason they don't live it is because it doesn't work. So you have to have a set of values yourself and as an organization that work in the real world. And then you can live them. And we try really hard to live our values. What I find people are going to, they'll hear this, but they're mostly judge you by what you do and ultimately by who you are. And a lot of leadership is developing who you are as an individual. That's really what people see ultimately. two books that have had a big impact on me. My favorite book by far, book I would strongly recommend to you, is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. She is by far my favorite author. She also wrote another book called The Fountainhead, which I think is a great book. I'm also very interested, and this is more technical, but I think it's got huge implications. I'm also very interested in economics, and I would recommend a book called Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. That's a tough book. Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead are very fun books to read, and along with being very powerful, they're novels. But the other would be Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. Okay, well, that's a great question. We actually own a psychological development company. We own a company called Farr Associates. We literally bought it to train our senior leaders. It has in it what they call an intensive executive development workshop, and embedded in that is a self-awareness program. And it's a very interesting process. It's a very carefully designed system that allows you, if you choose to look at your psychological premises. What it allows you to do, self-hypnosis sounds too grandiose, but it allows you to surf what you've done with your life. You think of your mind as kind of like a computer, and you wrote the programs, and you're running the programs, but you've pushed most of your thinking into the subconscious. And 95% of your thinking takes place in the subconscious, and you're running on automatic programs that you started building when you were, 1 year old, maybe younger than that, maybe even, very young, you've been building those programs. What this allows you to do is bring those programs back to surface. And what you'll find is a lot of times you made bizarre conclusions as a child, usually around relationships with your parents, about yourself. Classically, a lot of people have, they believe they're not lovable. And then they act out consistent with that belief. Or they believe they're not good enough. They always got to be better. And if you can bring those subconscious beliefs to consciousness, they don't go away. But you can modify them, and you can change those beliefs. You can rewrite your program over a period of time. Now, you can't do that with one 5-day seminar, but if you get down that path over the course of several years, you can radically change your subconscious beliefs. And that kind of process I would recommend to almost anybody, because most people have some, particularly successful people, are often motivated by some kind of dysfunctional belief that they don't have to be motivated. That's a great question. Productivity really reflects goal setting. And what I think is, what I believe in is something I call rational optimism. Rational optimism is the belief that given the laws of nature and given my and our team's capacity to think, we can be successful. And what it says, too, is that you ought to reach for stretch goals. That maybe if the best the world thinks you can do is to grow 10%, you ought to try to grow 12%. And the reason for that is a stretch goal will motivate you more. And even if you don't get there, you will learn more in that process. A lot of times people constrain themselves by their goals. A lot of the people in this room are probably happy to have Bs when they may be capable of getting As. So what do? When they get a B, they stop. Well, do you really want to be a B player in all your life? Right? I mean, think about it. This is your life. This is it. You don't get to do this again. So setting stretch goals is very motivational. When I joined BB&T, it was a $250 million farm bank. We had 300 employees. We got a $118 billion company with 30,000 employees. People would have said that's impossible. We certainly had some luck in that process. But one thing we always did is we reached for very aggressive goals. And we didn't succeed all the time. But reaching for aggressive goals has very high payback. And it makes it more fun. It's more fun to get an A. Not because of the A, because of going for the A. It's not about the A. It's about forcing yourself to be the best you can be. And that's an end in itself. The game is not the grades. The game is the learning experience that you can choose to make or not make. Question about hiring. We do have Leadership development program goes back 35 years. We hire about 350 people out of college and university. We recruit here at this university and hired some very good people from this program. We are very sophisticated in our hiring. We've learned a lot. We actually have a 3-interview process. And those interviews are very scientifically designed. Hopefully they don't look like it, but they're scientifically designed to elicit a certain set of questions and answers. A lot of those questions are, interestingly enough, character related. We also have testing. We test for intelligence, but at a very basic level. We mostly think that grades are the indicator of intelligence. We mostly test for what I would call psychological propensities. Are you a person that's motivated to achieve? Are you an achievement-oriented person? On the other hand, you need to be assertive, but not too assertive. Are you going to be aggressive, be hard to get along with? So there's a series of questions that we ask. The way we got those questions is take our highest-performing employees, ask them those questions, and use that profile. So we profile you against our highest-performing employees. Now, one suggestion I'd make for wherever you go, anybody that gives you that test, always tell the truth. You can beat the test, but when you get there, you're not going to be happy, right? So don't try to beat the test. Just reflect what your reality is. I would say one other thing about recruiting. I guess probably a lot of seniors in here. Remember that any organization that you go looking for a job, you ought to sell yourself, right? You ought to say, why? And the question is, why would they hire me, right? Simple question. And it's not going to be just your grades. It's good that you have good grades. Please don't. It's not trivial. But are you ambitious? Have you even gone to the trouble of understanding the organization? Would you be happy with the kind of job they have in that organization? Do some research. Think about it. But go in there and sell yourself. And you'll find that most of life after you leave school is about selling from one form to another. Large organizations, creativity is a huge challenge. And a couple of thoughts, let me just give you a couple of thoughts about creativity and what we do. There are, I think, several obstacles to creativity. The number one beginning obstacle is the belief that I am not creative. If you study children in kindergarten, 95% of kids are rated as creative. Think about kindergarten kids. They do many creative things. I wonder if will this work? Okay. Kids do many creative things. By 35 years old, 85% of those kids have learned that they're not creative. People learn not to be creative. So our education system, by the way, teaches us not to be creative. Creativity is a natural human attribute. Second thought about creativity is that you have to take responsibility for being creative. That's not something that you naturally learn in the school process. A lot of people go into management roles and view themselves as systems maintainers. And there is a systems maintenance role, but you can't pay people much for doing that. It's pretty easy. We can hire people out of high school generally to do that. A really good leader is somebody that, yes, maintains the systems, but is constantly figuring out how to do things better. The third obstacle to creativity is the belief that it is magical. A lot of people think that creativity just happens some magical way. Not so. Creativity is an intellectual process. There is no magic. It is an intellectual process. It is true that most creativity takes place in the subconscious, but 95% of your thinking takes place in the subconscious. If you look at creative people, they set out on a task. They often think about it consciously. They have the capacity to put it into their subconscious, see other interrelationships, and then come up with a creative solution. In fact, if you look at what defines creative people, two things. One, they believe that they're capable of being creative, and they believe they should be creative. And interesting attributes. In terms of sponsoring creativity in our organization, we do it in a couple of ways. One, we have educational programs. We literally have 2 programs that are designed to help people be creative. One is designed for individual creativity. The other is designed for team creativity. Now, teams are never really creative. Only people think, but teams interface and can spark creativity in individuals. And there are techniques that you can use to get more creativity out of the team. And the beginning point is creating a context where people will do out-of-the-box thinking. A lot of times what happens to us individually, and particularly in teams, people are afraid to get out of the box. And there are techniques to help you get out of the box and then get back into the box. The second thing is we incent creativity. We have what we call the Chairman's Innovation Awards, and we pay people $10,000 for creating innovative ideas, and so we incent creativity in that regard. But it is a struggle. Creativity is a challenge. That's a great question. What was my first job out of college, and why am I successful? I'll tell you an interesting thing. My first job out of college was with BB&T in 1971. I've been here 35 years. As I mentioned earlier, it was a small farm bank when I joined it. We had what we called a management development program, but it wasn't a management development. I started on the teller line. I went to the back. I did the bookkeeping. Now, this will really shock you. When I joined the bank, we had no computers, right? In fact, we didn't have electronic calculators. We used slide rules. So that shows you how old I am. Anyway, I started at the basic jobs. But I did an interesting thing, and I think this has been helpful to me. When I really got a job, I really was mostly in the lending business, and I mostly made loans to farmers. And we were a big agricultural bank. We financed a lot of hog operations, livestock operations, those kind of things. I took a different approach, and this wouldn't so be true today so much, but when I joined the bank, banking was largely a good old boy business. People did business with their friends. I thought I could be a good friend, but that wasn't my forte. What I could really do was provide better financial advice. So I went to see these farmers, got their financial information, really understood the financial information, understood their business, where they were making bad business decisions, not just financial decisions. Are they getting good prices on fertilizer? I could look at 5 of them and see who's getting the best deal, who wasn't. And then went back to them and provided them with better financial advice and better business advice. And frankly, I killed the guys that were the good old boys that played golf with. Because it's nice to play golf with somebody, but it's better somebody can make you some money and have a better life, right? So I took that kind of approach. And the concept was that, I make a lot of money, and I like making money. Okay, nothing wrong with that. I like being CEO, nothing wrong with that. But I never thought about making money or being CEO, never. My always goal was whatever job I had was to do it better than anybody had ever done it before. And at the same time, think about how that job impacted the rest of the organization. So I was going to be the best at doing whatever it was that I did. And I was fortunate to be in an organization, but I think most organizations that are business like this, if you do something really well, they let you do something else. And my career has always been focused on mastering whatever job not making a judgment on how important the job was, but doing it better than anybody else has done it. And I think a lot of times people get hooked up, and I'm going to get a promotion before somebody else is, or I want to be president. I don't think you should think in those kind of terms. I think you should think of mastery of whatever it is. While you're in college, you think it's really doing your college well. And that it'll be a lot more fun, too, if you do it that way. So that's kind of how I've approached my career.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. Really appreciate it. I think you've given us an amazing amount of food for thought. So thank you so very, very much on behalf of the College of Business and Public Administration. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.